Good morning, everyone. I love that. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. My name is Jeff Piercy, and I'm delighted to serve as your worship associate today and to welcome you fully into this space. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies here. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit here. We welcome all you are bringing with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We welcome all of you. We invite our guests to fill out a welcome card located in the pew rack in front of you and drop it in the offering plate later in the service. Guests may also pick up a welcome packet at the back of the sanctuary, where folks will also find hearing assist devices and Braille hymnals. A fragrance-free area is located to the front right side, first few pews. If you are a visiting family, and including children or youth, after the time for all ages, which actually will be a new member reception today, noted in your order of service, please join the children's recessional and head across the hall to the common room. There you will be greeted by someone who will orient you to religious education. Immediately following the service, everyone is invited for coffee and conversation in the common room. My name is Jeff, and you can come and talk to me at the guest table there. As a way to engage at First Church, I invite you to explore the announcements for the numerous opportunities available here. In particular, let me draw attention to the following. Today is the last day for sign up for the Giving Tree. Visit the religious education table to sign up for a Giving Tree gift for a person involved with a food pantry. You sign up, purchase a gift, and return it to the church by December 15th. At first service, we had 30 tags left. I don't know how many are left now, which all need to be claimed today, so thanks for helping. Faith in the Streets kickoff event. Join us today from 1:30 to 3 p.m. for our first gathering of Faith in the Streets, a new group of members of First Church and Zao Milwaukee Church to bring our faith into the streets and protest, art and song. If you would like to travel with us to Zao Church for the event, meet the carpoolers in the common room at 12:45. She's going to help. On Friday, we shared the news that our beloved associate musician, Jack Forbes Wilson, has moved to Lincoln, Nebraska to be closer to his family. Jack will return to provide music at services on December 22nd, 24th, and 29th, but will no longer be on staff as of January 1st. What a loss. Jack has requested that we refrain from any official farewell ceremony or event. However, if you'd like to share a written message, memory, or perhaps draw a picture for Jack, please stop by the membership table where we will have a special book that you can sign beginning this Sunday through any Sunday in December. Finally, please silence any electronic devices for the remainder of the service. Once again, I welcome you to First Church by inviting you to join me in the unison reading of our mission, which is printed in your order of service. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. Today, I'd like to invite Molly Uchtman to help me light the chalice.
Our opening words this morning are Waiting for Now by Mandy McGlynn. Everything is about to change, and it already has. It will be, it was, it is. The dawn you eagerly await to end the long, cold darkness is already full sun far off in the east. Yet even after light's return, spring is still months away. Stones of justice have been tossed in the lake, but their ripples have not yet arrived, have not resolved into the kingdom already present among us. While we wait, let us seek in the darkness of the now and the darkness of the not yet, for the treasures love has hidden there, the riches of secret places only found by night. This is what is promised us. The wheel of life turns ever on, and darkness, too, is a path to joy. Will you please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing hymn number 55, Dark of Winter. I'd like to invite you to join me now in a time of contemplation, which will be followed by silence, followed by the seated singing of Spirit of Life. So just take a second and do whatever your body needs to do to feel centered. Maybe you let your feet ground you, and the top of your head connect you. And your breath bring you into being here and now. Spirit of life and love, Holy One of our being and our becoming, that which is sacred within, among, and beyond us. Connect us with one another, human heart to human heart. We humans are creatures with powers of beauty and awe, creation and destruction. May we find our breath in the awful and learn to connect to the awesome. May our lives be part of transforming cruelty to kindness. Together, may we be part of healing and hope and a new story of the world to come. May it be so.
I was awestruck. I was in the dirt on my knees, my head was on the ground, and I was sobbing. The ground I was on was sacred. It was the grave of a family of 6. They had all died on the same day, November 7th, 2013. My cameras were in the dirt of the grave next to this one, and that grave was next to over 100 others, some marked and a mass grave of unidentified people. They had all died on the same day, November 7th, 2013. I had been sent to the Philippines on assignment by the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee to document the continued devastation 1 year after Typhoon Haiyan, or as it is known in the Philippines, Yolanda, devastated 13 islands. I had spent 2 weeks hopping from island to island showing how contributions had been spent to meet the needs of people. Our last stop was Leyte. This island took the brunt of the landfall. I was in the city of Tacloban for 3 days. Over 8,000 people had been killed in less than 12 hours. 8,000 people had been killed in less than 12 hours. In the previous 3 weeks, I had photographed and written about dozens of people who had suffered devastating losses. For example, I had spent the previous afternoon with an organization called the Widows of Tacloban. Hundreds of women of all ages whose husbands died on November 7th, 2013. The women had gotten to higher ground while the men stayed back to protect their homes. Many had never been found. And then I asked to see the mass graves. We came to the church of Santo Nino. An odd thing happens to a working photojournalist. We are only as good as we're able to open our heart to the people we photograph, and at the same time, the camera provides us the illusion of protection and allows us to work in difficult circumstances. But pain and sorrow leak in through the lens of my camera and saturate my soul. I always know that I will need to process these feelings at some point, but the camera allows me to keep working. People began to bury loved ones in any open area available. The large front yard of the church of Santo Nino was turned into a mass grave and a large cemetery. Families were identified with photos on crude wooden headstones. My handlers backed away to allow me to wander through the cemetery. I was suddenly overwhelmed with all I had seen and everyone I had engaged with, the cumulative grief of people. I was in awe. I was awestruck, and I simply fell where I was to allow the accumulated sadness pour out of me. But the awe I felt was not limited to the devastation I observed. The other thing that had overwhelmed me was the incredible resiliency of people. I knew from that moment of awe that I would never again be able to just be a passive observer of natural and man-made devastation. The courage, perseverance, and kindness of the survivors changed me. Make that we are connected to people who are marginalized through no fault of their own. The vast migrations of people fleeing their homes, the survivors of natural disaster. In Tacloban, with nowhere to turn, survivors found and buried their dead. They discovered internal resources all human beings have, but only a few need to access in their lifetime. Families simply redefined themselves by who was left to love. People who had been through great devastation I had only observed treated me with kindness. They gave me shelter. They gave me food. They gave me their stories. And all I can say is thank you. Salamat. Matakie Wayasan.
Merriam-Webster defines awe as an emotion variously combining dread, veneration, and wonder that's inspired by authority or by the sacred or sublime. The word awe comes from root words meaning fear as well as reverence, and aw's etymological children include both the words awful and awesome. In the word awful, being full of awe has taken on the fear and dread portions of awe, whereas in the word awesome, being full of awe has taken on the reverence and wonder portions. But awful and awesome come from the same root. Human beings similarly encompass both aspects of awe. We are awesome and awful in equal measure. In an essay on human resilience and imagination's transformative power, author Susan Griffin tells a story about the French surrealist poet Robert Desnos. The story was first told to her by her friend Odette, who's also a writer, and Odette is a Holocaust survivor. Desnos was part of the French resistance to the Nazi occupation, and he was captured in his resistance and sent to a concentration camp. While he was there, Griffin writes, along with many others who crowded in the bed of a large truck, Desnos is being taken away from the barracks of the concentration camp. Leaving, the mood is somber. Everyone on the truck knows that the truck is headed for the gas chambers. And when it arrives, no one can speak at all. Even the guards fall silent. But the silence is soon interrupted by an energetic man who jumps out of line and grabs another person who's standing there. That man, Robert Desnos, reads the other man's palm. "Oh," he says exuberantly, "I see you have a very long lifeline, and you're going to have 3 children." He is excited and enthusiastic, and it's contagious. First, another man, and then another offers Desnos his hands. And again, the prediction is for longevity, children, and abundant joy. Human beings are capable of extreme beauty and extreme awfulness. The word awe encompasses both. We've had an awful series of incidents in our Wisconsin schools this week. In just this past week, there have been 8 threats of school shootings in Wisconsin, including an incident in Oshkosh and one in Waukesha where students who brought weapons to school were shot by police officers. Both of the students survived, and they didn't shoot any other students, but the experience was terrifying and awful. Waukesha is pretty close to home. We have members here who live in Waukesha, members who have family in Waukesha schools as teachers and students and administrators. We have members with family on the responding police force. This incident wasn't just news for many of the people who are sitting in this room today. This was a story about family. This was a story about home. And when you're talking about your neighbors or your cousin or wife or childhood friend, the experience of that story shifts a little bit. It can be easy to assume heroes and villains among people that we don't know, following a script that we've read before. But when we're talking about people we do know, a kid who was bullied, for instance, or a teacher who would have given his life to protect his students, or an officer who had joined the force because he wanted to help people. When we're talking about students we know, young people who lived through a lockdown at school and heard the words, "This is not a drill," then the feelings are more raw, more real, and maybe a little bit more complicated. Telling the story itself becomes complicated because every word carries the weight of someone we know, maybe even someone we love, someone to whom we are obligated, with whom we are in accountable relationship. So when we tell the story, do we say that the person who brought the guns to school was a student who was bullied? Does it matter if we say that the student was black? When we tell the story, should we say that the guns were pellet guns? And then what if we also say that there's no way to tell the difference between a pellet gun and a real gun? Does it matter if we say that the shooting officer was white? What if we then say that the student pointed his pellet gun at the officer before he shot him? What happens if we say that the shooting officer is a friend of one of our members? Should we put our focus on telling the stories of people who responded in the moment to try to help and protect other students in that school? Should we focus on telling the story of what led up to the incident, what was happening at home or at school before this? Should we talk about where the guns came from? What about the histories of all the people that were involved? What about the systems and the policies and the training that formed the framework of all of those histories of people that lived them out together? There is awfulness and awesomeness and everything in between in this story and in all the tributaries of stories that fed into this story. In the Robert Desnos story, when he was standing in line to go to the gas chamber, the surrealist poet kept reading more and more palms, predicting long and joyful lives for every prisoner in line. Griffin writes again, as Desnos reads more palms, not only does the mood of the prisoners change, but that of the guards too. They became disoriented. In fact, they became so disoriented by this sudden change that they are unable to go through with the executions. So the guards put all of the men, along with Desnos, back onto the truck and drove them back to the barracks. No one went to the gas chamber that day, and Desnos was never executed. Human beings are capable of extreme awfulness and extreme awesomeness. Desnos was able to show a resilience and a creativity in the face of seemingly insurmountable horror. He told a story in wild opposition to reality. But in sharing that story, in sharing his alternative vision of what was possible, that vision became powerful enough to transform the horror that was surrounding him. How can we be part of creating a vision of love and connection and hope that it is so powerful that it overwhelms the horror around us? Sometimes we tell stories in ways that dehumanize people. Sometimes we tell stories in ways that take complicated and multifaceted human beings and collapse them into flat character cutouts. I hope that this week we're learning that it's a little bit harder to do that when a story is close to home and you know the people. Universalism's theology holds that all people are sacred and inherently worthy, even in the midst of stories of suffering and harm. But just as we cannot collapse complex people into flat heroes and villains, nor can we collapse complex stories into a flat everybody matters and so it's all the same. Everyone does matter. But not everyone has had the same experience. Differences in our lives, including differences of power, affect how much we have been harmed, how we process that harm, and choices that we make about causing harm. Restorative justice processes seek to address harm in ways that are consistent with universalist theology as well as with the unique specifics of people's real lives. Restorative justice respects and honors the full humanity of everyone involved in an experience of harm, but it doesn't flatten that humanity into simple archetypes like hero and villain, good guy and bad guy. Rather, it invites people who have been involved in an experience of harm to tell their full stories and allows them to encounter one another as full people with their full range of feelings, while also addressing and acknowledging the fact that harm was caused. Restorative justice recognizes that relationships in a situation of harm go beyond offender and victim and include the entire community, that those relationships are part of what caused the situation and part of where the situation ripples out. It understands that none of us are isolated individuals, that we're all connected to one another and influence one another's lives. It's a framework that's been used in our criminal justice systems, in schools, and even in international relations after conflict or mass violence. It's an alternative to a punishment or retribution framework because the focus of restorative justice is on repairing the harm that was done rather than punishing someone for wrongdoings. Focusing on repairing harm that is done actually puts the victims of the harm at the center of the story and then asks them to say what their own needs are. It asks the victims of the harm to define what they need. But it also doesn't exclude the humanity of the persons or people who caused the harm. Instead, it asks those persons or people to be in accountable relationship with the people that they harmed, to listen to their story and learn what the impact of their actions were. Restorative justice asks fundamentally different questions than punitive justice. Instead of asking what laws have been broken and by who, and what punishment do they therefore deserve, restorative justice asks, who has been hurt? What are their needs? And whose obligation is it to respond to those needs? It also asks, why did this happen? What are the root causes of this pain? And who has a stake in this situation, and how should they be involved in helping repair it? It's more complex. You end up with a larger and more difficult puzzle to solve than what laws were broken by who and what punishment do they deserve, because you're now talking about a complicated and interdependent web of relationships that are affected by the situation and were part of creating it. It looks at the community basis of crime and harm and how the community can and should be involved in repair. We're in the middle of an epidemic of harm when it comes to gun violence. In 2018, more school-aged children were killed by gun homicide than members of the military and police officers combined. That's part of the context of our story here. That's part of where the shuddering fear and dread comes from. When the children heard, "This is not a drill," they knew what that meant. Also, race makes a difference in children's experience with gun violence. Black children and youth in the United States are 14 times more likely to be victims of gun homicide than white children or youth. This terrifying story that we're in the midst of gun violence in a Waukesha school and in 7 other Wisconsin schools this week is a story that's unfolded in our Black communities over and over. That's another part of the larger context of this story, of the tributaries that run into this river. Restorative justice asks these kind of larger questions, as well as questions about the specific harm that happened in an incident. And we can say that deep harm was done this week by the student who brought those 2 pellet guns into school in Waukesha and pointed them at a fellow student and police officers. And deep harm was done to that student who was shot. And moreover, deep harm has been done by the gun companies who have made guns so widely available that the specter of school shootings is the known story in our schools. It's a reality that our students and teachers and administrators and police departments know so well, that they have trained on it, know how to respond to it, and that was the imaginative bridge to terror that was crossed into our real lives this week. There are many students around the country who are just waiting for something like this to happen in their school. The knowledge of it is both surreal and it is so real for our kids. There are layers and layers and layers of harm here. Different pieces of context and larger stories and smaller stories that fit in those larger stories. And the layers of harm are what must be addressed in order for our community and the people within it to heal. Our theology links the inerrant worth of every human being into the interdependent web of all existence. It's a complex universalism that respects all people, but also recognizes the way that harm is distributed differently among them. And then it centers the folks who have been harmed the most. This universalism doesn't condemn people who have caused harm in this world, but it empowers victims to identify their own needs and then ask for those needs to be met. This is a wildly different frame than punitive justice, which usually just creates flat caricatures of people, stereotypes, and fear of the other, whoever the other is. The stories that we tell matter. How we talk about our fellow human beings matters. Robert Desnos started telling a story of hope that was so compelling that it overwhelmed Nazi guards on a death mission. Right now, we could choose to tell a story of retribution and punishment, of simple, flat heroes and villains, or we could imagine something wildly different, something more complicated, something where people get to be full, complicated humans. We could tell a story that recognizes the humanity of everyone involved and the long, complex histories and the bigger pictures that led to this moment of terror and awfulness. And we could choose to invoke the power of human connection to create a new vision of what's possible, a vision of repair and transformation and love. Restorative justice is one tool that could facilitate the kind of transformation that we need in our community. It's one tool that might help us encounter one another and learn each other's deep truths and complex lives. I hope that we will create the space for our community to examine the root causes of harm and to begin employing preventative medicine as well as repair. The ending of our story is not written yet. I hope that we might be part of dreaming an impossible dream of hope for the future. I hope that we will share this dream in a way that will connect us like a little string of lights for the holiday season, sharing it one to the next and becoming more powerful. Dreams of hope and connection in the face of awfulness, and repair and communal transformation in the darkness light up more and more people, and as they do, those dreams take root in our world. Will you hold your palms up for me, loved ones? I'd like to read your future. Let's see. I see repair of harm and prevention of future gun violence in our future. I see racial justice and reconciliation in our city's future. I see clean water and healthy air in our world. Oh, yes. And I see long and healthy lives for each and every one of you. May it be so. Will you please rise in body or spirit and join us for our responsive reading, which is printed in your orders of service. This reading is adapted from Jan Richardson's Advent Blessing. I'll begin. Blessed are you who bear the light in unbearable times. Who bear witness to its persistence. Blessed are you in whom the light lives. Your heart a chapel, an altar where in the deepest night, in unaccountable faith, in love that illumines, will you join in singing our closing hymn, number 118, This Little Light of Mine?